And Madam Secretary of State, if you want to go ahead and come. No, Insurance Commissioner's not here yet. Oh, do what? Okay. You probably need to go over here. Yeah. Since we're on the internet and stuff.
I would say this is the cooler side of
Yeah, it is. Yeah. Thank you for being here. I do have a question on the professional licensing board part of it.
Yes, sir. Are you on the tracking?
I am. I'm on page 38 of ours, 38 of 44.
In front of me?
Of course, that's dealing with 4166, reduce operating expense related to per diem and fees for exam proctors, 53,000, and contractual services related to direct exam expenses. What all does that involve? What I can't even remember how many boards you have down there. And
So we have 36 boards, and what this involves is we embarked on a project last year. It came to our attention that a number of our professional licensing exams were still being conducted by paper and pencil. So that kind of made it hard to go to some online testing. So we converted the remainder of the test to computer-based CBT testing. And then from there, we are looking at trying to outsource the testing function to, and that will allow us to achieve those savings in the FY09.
okay, like the builders board, I know they're struggling. Builders, have we seen a great loss of builders from Chapter 11 going out of business that doesn't warrant to have as many personnel there that as we once did? Of course, I know y'all rotate. What, the executive directors?
No, we don't.
So they have a one executive director there and staff personnel assigned to it.
No, actually, the way that the professional licensing boards are organized is we have an executive director that supports a group of boards, and that was part of our reorganization. You'll recall that in last year's appropriation, FY08, we were allocated $100,000 to bring in an outside management firm to help us look at the structure of licensing and to get some better organization, and then to be able to recognize some of the efficiencies that had been achieved by going on to the online renewal process or processing renewals of licenses.
Okay. Anybody else have any questions? Chairman Williams.
Good afternoon. In the reduction of personnel, I know you've cut back. How will this affect the effectiveness of the investigations and all? I understand that there's still things that need to be done in that area. Is that going to affect your ability to properly supervise or investigate violations of on these boards?
Absolutely not, sir. None of the personnel reductions in the investigative area. A number of the vacancies that we are holding that are still funded, those are investigator positions, and we did request through the process that our investigative positions be denoted as critical hires, and that
Thank you.
Anybody else? I do have one. How much is the total reduction your office has done in the '09? What is the percentage? Is it 6% or is it 4.3 million?
32.9 million, sir.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the committee's
Okay.
indulgence.
Insurance Commissioner here yet? Okay. Okay. Rick, you want to come on up? Rick Thompson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Rick Thompson with the State Ethics Commission. And I know I've spoken to many of you individually. Our budget is pretty straightforward. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer any questions you may have.
And, Chair Lady Smith.
Thank you. And that was a very brief presentation.
Thank you, Representative. I try.
It has been brought to my attention, and I'm hoping you can clarify for me. When we're looking at the cost to the state of certain things, the badges that you issue for all of our registered lobbyists, do they pay for those?
No, ma'am. Currently in the law, under the Ethics and Government Act, there is a provision that there's a $200 registration fee. However, that provision in the law exempted certain nonprofits from having to report or to pay that. In 1994, the AFL-CIO sued the state of Georgia because it was unconstitutional. The federal court held that it was unconstitutional because it exempted certain nonprofits and not others. So, though that's still on the books, that there is no registration fee for lobbyists that we can enforce. Now, we have asked for legislation to be introduced, and Senator Harp has introduced Senate Bill 17, which puts the registration fee of what the cost is for us to make these badges at $50 for lobbyists. It's actually $55, but we figured $50 would be a better number that we could justify. So we do have a piece of legislation.
Further question, Mr. Chair? So we are paying as a budget item to the state the cost of lobbyists to lobbyists.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Mr. Chair, I think that's something that our committee should also be looking into. I mean, you want to do what's fair, but I don't think that there was ever an intention that the state bear the cost for something else. So, thank you. It almost goes to the gratuity clause in government. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Rick, you mentioned to me earlier, how many lobbyists do we have now?
This year already we have 1,466 registered.
Okay. And it costs you how much a badge?
$55 per badge. If we institute the $50 per badge, I believe we would generate around $85,000 for the badges that would go back to the state.
Okay. They also have to register. When they register as a lobbyist, they have to show who they're lobbying for.
Yes, sir.
If it's more than one different group, does it require a different process, or can they list them all at one time?
The way we have the legislation drafted is to say that if you register as a lobbyist, there's a $50 registration fee, and for every group you register after that, there's a $10 processing fee that would go toward it, and that would be for staff time entering into the system, and if we have to reprint a badge. If you lobby for one individual, it's required to have the name of the entity you lobby for. If you lobby for more than one, then it's required to say lobbyist and not all the different names. So there is a $10 fee for each one after that.
Okay. Number 27.
It's me again. Thank you,
Okay.
Mr. Chairman. Where does the cost of the publication of the book, is that included in the badge?
No, ma'am. In fact, last year we were able to produce those and provide a copy of the lobbyist roster to each member of the General Assembly. This year, we're not able to do that. In fact, we're only printing the ones that were pre-ordered by lobbyists or the public, and we charged a fee for those books.
So we are at least recovering those costs.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, and then I'm sure it's available on a website for any of our public who might be listening. You can go onto a website and find the registered lobbyist. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. The roster is published. It's automated, and every time we add a new lobbyist or someone files a disclosure report, it immediately comes on the internet, and they can print rosters or view rosters with the pictures.
So we would go to your website?
ethics.ga.gov.
Thank you.
Representative James.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And help me to understand one thing. What is the fee that you pay to the state to be a lobbyist?
There is no fee currently, Representative.
Mr. Chairman, see this badge here? I'm a representative and I had to pay for it.
We pay for everything, Representative.
But lobbyists get theirs free?
Through an error in the law. I mean, it's been correct. There was a court ruling.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'm learning about this here. And I appreciate lobbyists, don't get me wrong. But still, I think that, Mr. Chairman, that should be something changed there.
Well, they should pay for the cost, that's for sure. So.
Yes.
Absolutely. Plus, it's tax deductible to them. Okay. Rick, your total budget now in the 09 is, how much is it, 1.6?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how many employees do you have now?
We have 19 positions and 18 filled.
19 positions and 18 filled. Okay. What was your budget when you took over?
I think roughly 600,000.
600,000.
And that was before we were the filing officer for the state.
How long has that been?
In 2006, the new law went into effect, and we were appropriated in the amended budget of 2006.
Okay. Have you taken a pay cut yourself? Have you volunteered to take a pay cut?
Not this time, Representative.
Okay. Anybody below you?
No, sir.
Okay.
We have not furloughed or reduced anybody's pay.
Okay.
We cut our operational costs to attempt to get to the percentage that's been withheld.
Okay. What's the total amount of fines and fees have you incurred since you've been there?
Since I've been there, I can tell you in 2008, we assessed over $255,000 worth of civil penalties. We assessed $230,000 in late fees that we are attempting to collect right now.
I've already paid you.
And the citizens of Georgia appreciate that, Representative.
Okay. And on time.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, number 25.
That's me, Mr. Chairman. Rick, on the reduction of personnel services, what's your plan on the furloughs? So many days? What have you got worked out as far as?
Actually, Representative, we believe that because of the size of our agency, we would actually have to reduce staff instead of furloughs to make that number.
Okay, so furloughs are out, but you're going to lay off folks?
Yes, sir.
Okay. How many?
Anywhere between 2 to 5.
Okay. You can operate under that situation effectively?
I think we'd have to, Representative.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back in touch with you.
Thank you, sir.
Real Estate Commission, are they here? Okay.
Good afternoon. Thank you. Jeff Ledford with the Real Estate Commission. Much like you were just asking about the lobbyist fees, we're funded solely from the fees that we collect from the licensed population that we oversee. In recent years, we've collected probably well over $10 million, in excess of what it costs us to operate, considering also about a 15% of other agencies that contribute to what we do, Department of Law, Secretary of State's office. We have come closer to achieving balance in recent years, but this, obviously, the cuts would throw us much further out of balance. One of the things that we have faced in light of recent circumstances is that real estate is right at the heart of what all's going on, what all's continuing. As times get worse, we're seeing that the complexity of the cases we're working with is growing and thus taking longer. We have 3 vacant investigator positions, and one of those is important to focus on because that was filled last year, and so it gives us a good flavor of where we'd be heading without those. The one that in fiscal year 2006, we had peaked over 1,000 pending cases. I think we had about 1,059. As we entered into FY07, we had reduced that down to 974, and we entered FY08 with right at about 900. As of this day, we're around 1,000 pending cases again, just because of essentially what we're getting in and our reduced staff that we have right now. We're also seeing that our investigative cases are ultimately leading to more hearings. We had 126 hearings last year, and so we have typically paid a flat fee of about $80,000 to the Office of State Administrative Hearings to conduct and hold our hearings for us, and so we don't pay a per hearing cost. What we have just been told is that at the rate that we are having the hearings over stuff that's stemming from kind of the recent times, we're likely to be incurring cost of about $20,000 to $30,000 more next year. And so as we reduce in that area, we're also going to see increased cost in carrying those forward. We are trying to settle as many of those as possible, when possible, to have an out-of-hearing settlement. And we do try to recoup some of the cost on that to put back into the budget. Of course, the problem is then you can't pay someone a salary based on the incurred cost. That covers much of our legal fees and copy charges, things like that. One of the other things that has impacted us since our proposed cuts is we had put forth about $130,000 out of contracts that essentially was given to us last year for something that didn't ultimately end up becoming law. What has hit us hard is that some of that money had to go to pay for. We ended last year with about $100,000 left over in contracts, and we received some late invoices from the Department of Law for about $80,000 that we had to take out of this year's money. And so while we are planning on using some of the recouped costs to try to balance some of that out, that is going to make it difficult to balance because we paid FY08 incurred charges. It was about 4 billings to the Department of Law out of this year's money. So that is going to make it tough. Any questions, I guess?
Your total budget for 09 is how much?
The current year that we're in right now is $3.6 million. However, the recommendations would take us down to 3.2.
Okay. As far as the real estate licensing part of it, you mentioned $10 million is what you brought into the state treasury. Is that right?
Roughly, it's about in recent years, in the peak years, it was about $1.5 million a year. When you total up just the past several years, I think it was about $10 million over what it cost us plus the 15% to operate. So in other words, a profit to the state of about $10 million. I have some information here I could give you that explains kind of the history of where our balance fee structure comes from. We were sued by the Realtors Organization in the 70s because we were about 50% out of balance. We haven't been in balance, I believe, since 2000. And so they have been noticing it, but we have been approaching balance each year. Part of the problem has been there's been a spike in the licensee population. In the past 4 years, it's grown by about 20,000 plus. We haven't seen it taper off despite what's recently happened to any great extent. I believe we had peaked in 2007 at 105,000 licensees, and we're right at about 103,000 right now. So in years where we were growing by 12 to 15,000 a year, we've only seen about 2,000 go out of the business. So,
all the continuing ed, don't you get funding on the continuing ed portion too?
no.
You do not. You don't get any of that?
No, we require continuing education. We have 6 hours a year that's required. That goes to private entities, to schools. Now we do put on some of the education. In other words, we will have certain things like an instructor training workshop. That is not funded from state revenue or state funds. That is from an education recovery fund, which essentially is kind of a protective measure that was put in place in '72. That is, if someone is harmed by a real estate licensee, allows some costs to be recouped, and then we can pursue those pursue action. In other words, if someone sues a real estate licensee, wins a judgment, and is unable to collect, they can file a claim against the recovery fund. Most of the expenditures out of the recovery fund have been used to help prevent violations. In other words, we have a trust account course that we fund out of that. We have a course that, one that's on preventing violations, common violations, things like that. But most of the CE is through private schools that teach it.
How much is in your trust fund?
Right now, it's about $2 million.
$2 million.
And again, that is something that most of what's in there is used, most of the expenditures that come out of that are either to prevent, to fund some education projects to help people avoid violations, to provide some, they can get CE credit for it, or to help recoup when someone has been harmed by a licensee. Now, when that happens, we then seek to fund it back from that individual.
How much did you spend of that this year?
I believe last year, I don't have the figure in front of me, but about $200,000, primarily for some education projects, funding. Like I said, we have a trust account course, a brokerage course, and a broker management course.
Okay. And how many people do you have in your commission right now working?
Sure. Employees, we have 36 positions, and as of the middle of this month, we have 4 vacancies.
Okay. Any other questions? Representative Pruitt?
Just one. What is the standard amount that you keep in that trust fund? Is there a minimum or a maximum?
Right. Statutorily, we're required to have at least $1 million in there. What we have done in recent years is to fund, one of the expenditures is to fund a newsletter that we send out so that we're not having to pay for that out of appropriated funds, to keep licensees informed of everything from law changes to typical areas where they might face possible violations. We've also done some every year we do a project where it's we gather the schools to do what we call an annual school meeting. It's been happening since 1974. Essentially, at that point, what we do is we can communicate to all the schools what we're seeing. We can find out what perhaps is coming down the road of certain issues. But we can then provide the schools with essentially training from our agency as to where they should be going and where they can be directing some of their effort. We don't prescribe necessarily a detailed pre-licensed program. We will tell the schools they need to have certain elements that they teach. But because real estate can cover everything from residential real estate to commercial, there could be certain types of courses that a different school may choose to teach based on their market area and their clients, I guess. What we do, though, is as we see items such as mortgage fraud, something on the horizon like that, we can then communicate with the schools what they need to be working into those courses to help basically avoid those problems or help people with identifying those red flags.
But if you're statutorily have to maintain $1 million, is there any reason during these economic times that we need to have $2 million?
Well, part of the reason we have that is because of the spike in the licensee population. Since, like I said, since 2004, we've gone from a little less than 80,000 to over 100,000. Every time someone gets licensed, they pay $20 into that fund. And so that's what's caused it to grow to that level just in recent years. Each year we've been spending kind of a fair amount out of it, but we were spending kind of at the rate that we had before the licensee spike occurred. And so what we are doing right now this year, recognizing the budget situation and in kind of trying to address not having to use appropriated funds as much, is we've funded an additional course out of that that's hitting the common violations we're seeing in investigations, so that we can help people avoid kind of the inadvertent mistakes that are causing our numbers to go up. We're also funding a mailing to all licensees of the common missteps that we're seeing. What we're trying to do is lower our investigative inflow by keeping people aware of the simple things they can do to avoid that from happening.
Are you using that money to do things that you would normally do out of your normal budget, and are you showing cuts in your budget when in reality it's coming out of the trust fund?
We can't use it for things that we would use out of our regular budget. In other words, we can't use that to pay for staff. We can't use that to pay for equipment in the office. We can't use it to pay for, anything that really is the operation of the commission. We can use it to fund an outside project. Again, it's for education or recouping a harmed party. And so what we've done is tried to think of what could reduce the inflow of cases, and what we hope is that education is the way to reduce that. Education meaning some outward project of notifying people of simple things they can do to avoid violations. The most common complaint we have is trust accounts, the mishandling of trust funds. And most of it comes from someone getting into an area they're not familiar with. And so as we can educate people and provide lower cost education in an economic time like this, we can give an incentive for people to come to classes that might teach them things on common violations, trust accounts, broker management, issues like that. We can also do a newsletter that goes to all of them explaining, here's some common things we've seen and simple steps that you can do to not get into this situation. Common example is you make an offer to purchase a home and you forget to bring your checkbook, and so you don't give the earnest money. The agent submits the offer, you change your mind, you back out, and the public has been harmed because those funds that should have been on hold for pulling that house off the market are no longer there. So the party that's entitled to it doesn't have it to receive. That's a very common complaint that we have that leads to our rise in case volume. The simple solution to that is to not move forward with that until you have that check in hand, because then you know that either you're moving forward and taking the house essentially off the market, or you have the funds in hand, or you're going to collect that. But that's a simple thing that can be avoided. But what we see is that that happens more often than we would like to see. There are other things that kind of in that same vein that hit specifically with what we're seeing on the investigative side. But if we can educate individuals that are licensed on how to avoid that simple situation and some other things, what we're hoping is that will in turn affect our case numbers, so that perhaps we don't have to expend as much resources in that direction. We are also right in the midst of enhancing our investigative technology, I guess you'd say, so that we can move into a direction where we're dealing with less paper and we're dealing with more, directly in the computer. Ultimately, that will reduce some of our costs, but that won't be realized until it's fully in place. And so that's been a project we've been slowly bringing into place since about 2005, and I think we're in the final stages of it, but that should ultimately make us more efficient. We've increased efficiency with our investigators by about 20%, apart from just the increased staffing.
Jeff, the courses that realtors take, obviously you don't get any dollars off of it.
Right.
How many schools are there? How many do y'all approve? And I know most of them are online now, I assume.
Well, there are a lot online. There are about 300, I believe, about 340 schools.
340 schools.
Right. Some of them teach nothing more than a particular course. You know, it could be a school that teaches primarily community association management issues. You know, small, not a lot of activity. It could be a school that teaches pre-license, continuing education, appraiser courses, and run the gamut. But 340 of those, I would say many of them offer online, but many of them are bricks and mortar.
All right, let me ask you to follow up. Who approves those in your office? I'm sure you've got 2, 3, 4 people that are designated to that.
We have one person that is our education advisor, coordinator. Most of those schools don't seek approval every year. They come in to our system over the years. What they do is they renew each year. And where we have been able to save cost, let me give an example. We have roughly the same licensee population as North Carolina. They have about 55 employees. We have 36. We've been able to keep our levels consistently at that ratio, primarily because of our website and our online renewals. We are typically between 92 and 94% of our licensees are doing their interaction with us online, whether they're updating their address, whether they're renewing their license, renewing their school license, instructor approval. They're doing it online. In comparison, you know, North Carolina is very similar to us. I believe California and Florida have larger populations, but they tend to have about 5 times the licensee population, 10 times the staff. They are seeing probably a far less percentage of online. I think California has about 10% online transactions. But we've been able to adapt primarily by taking it to the online area. That's what we're hoping to do with investigations is much of our activity down the road we hope will be handled more or less in the cyber medium rather than in paper. We can move around the state much quicker that way.
Out of the 340 schools, how much revenue do they generate? Do you have a figure on that?
We don't know. All we look at with the schools is that they are essentially providing the classes that they say they are, that they are keeping attendance records, that they are reporting to us who has taken a class, if they passed it. When it comes to the pre-license, they're required to upload the score of the student. In other words, that they passed the class. If a school is showing that they are producing students that cannot pass the state examination and they fall outside of a certain margin, then we can then remove that approval for that school. And so we look at their performance, not at their, in fact, we're not involved at all in their monetary aspect.
So on the pre-licensing of broker or sales, you don't get anything out of it, correct?
We don't get anything out of it with the schools. Now, they pay a fee to us, just like all the other licensees.
Okay.
They're part of the licensee population that you see.
Okay.
340 roughly of the 103,000 are going to be schools. Some of that population are going to be firms, some are going to be brokers, some are going to be salespersons,
Right.
and about 20% are going to be inactive individuals.
Okay. Any other questions from anybody? I think that's it. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you
for being here. And Commission on the Holocaust?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and committee members. here today to represent the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust. Very small but important agency in state government. And I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have.
What did you say? I'm sorry.
I said we're a small but important state agency.
Okay.
And I'm happy to entertain any questions you may have. We work effectively and efficiently throughout the entire state with our 3-person staff.
Three people?
Yes.
Okay. Some
Permanent
30,
employees.
39. 3 people. And your total budget is how much?
$364,819.
Okay. That's good. You did such a good job, nobody has any questions.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, drugs and narcotics.
Good afternoon. Rick Carston, newly appointed Director of Drugs and Narcotics since July the 1st. For just to give you a synopsis, I think everyone hopefully knows what we do, but we, all of my agents are pharmacists and we're law enforcement, and we work pharmaceutical drugs, all those people who possess and distribute and manufacture those drugs, whether there's pharmacies, physicians, or your average public. And we, if you'll see, last year we had an operating budget of about $1.7 million. We're down for 2008 to about 1.3. If you see, we've been hit hard twice, actually. If you'll look at it, we, after taking $40,000 for our motor vehicles, which we've got to have to do inspections, we've got over 3,000 pharmacies in the state of Georgia now, and taking another $50,000 for real estate, we only had $88,000 to work with. We couldn't implement the reductions with that money, so they had to come out of personal services. It's the only place we had to do it. So we have done that. We've implemented it. We have let go of 2 positions, taking us down to 10 positions now. And we're back to about where we were in the 70s as far as staff. We understand the fiscal problems and the necessity for it. Our registrants have doubled, but if you'll see also, we were not only cut by those figures, we were reduced by the $175,000. And if you'll remember last year, the House was so kind to give us $175,000 for our agents. We had, as I said, we're all pharmacists, which is a necessity in this job, and they're starting at $45,000, $50,000 a year, and pharmacists now can walk straight out of school starting at about $125,000. So the House voted on it, the Senate voted on it, the governor signed it. It was good. Everybody threw up our hats, but then, of course, fiscal problems happened, and it was taken away from us. So again, we've already terminated 2 positions in addition to the $175,000, which puts us down in the operating range of around $1.3 million and change.
Any questions? Thank you for being here. Commissioner Oxendine, you're next.
Did you get that?
23, Jimmy.
Ready, Mr. Chair? Very good to see everybody. Happy New Year. Not a whole lot to talk about. We took our cuts along with everybody else. It's been difficult fuzz as it has the various agencies. What we have gone through and cut some of our computer costs and other office costs. This basically everything else is personnel. We don't have a lot besides people, and that's where we've had to take most of our cuts. I ordered a furlough for the entire department effective September 1. That's 1 day a month. even though I'm statutorily set, I've included myself in that. So we have all taken a 1 day per month furlough. So that's about, give or take, about a 5% reduction in pay. The entire department is. I'd also like to point out that we were looking at our personnel numbers, and we have 20% fewer people today than we did 14 years ago, which is probably very few state agencies are in that situation. We are doing a lot more work with that number of people, and we're struggling along just like everybody else, but our agency is where any further cuts or any other additions are solely down to human beings. There is literally nothing but people to cut, in our agency. On another issue, I would like to mention just one other thing to the committee. I feel an obligation as the insurance commissioner to make a comment, since I am the elected representative of insurance consumers around the state. And I know they're very difficult times. The General Assembly has some very serious challenges, and you being in the House, y'all get first crack at probably the most difficult budget the state of Georgia has seen in decades. I would have to say that I do have serious concerns at these economic difficult times of the proposed new tax. You can call it a fee, but it's basically a tax on the health insurance carriers of 1.6%. That, in my opinion, that will be passed directly to health insurance consumers. I also am concerned about the proposed 1.6% tax on hospitals. In my professional opinion, especially in our more challenged communities in the state, the tax will jeopardize a very fragile health care delivery system that we do have in some of our smaller and more rural communities. I also believe that 1.6% will be passed on to the health insurance carriers, and it's not just the portion for those patients that have insurance, but you're probably going to see multipliers because Medicaid and Medicare and indigent services, probably all of that tax burden the hospitals have are likely to be put on the either cash pay customers or insurance pay customers. The more you start doing that, Georgia already has a very high number of uninsured Georgians, and I believe that people are going to pay the mortgage and buy groceries before they buy health insurance, and it could have the unintended consequence of contributing to more uninsured Georgians when they're having difficulty making ends meet. So that is just something I felt an obligation to mention to the subcommittee in my capacity as the insurance commissioner. I'd love to address any specific questions about any issues, Mr. Chair, or to any members of the subcommittee.
I have one question, Commissioner. I understand you have a smokehouse that you carry around the state of Georgia.
We have 3 of them.
3?
2 of them were purchased with state funds. 1 of them was donated from a private company. The newest one is the donated one. The 2 that were purchased with state funds, they were about how many years, Angie? About how many years ago? Yeah, well, no, it was about 10. I think 12 and 10. The 2 that purchased, I think, were give or take about 12 and 10. They are showing their age. There's a very good program. My fire marshal's office goes to schools and educates children about fire safety. It is a very important public service. The Department of Education does not oversee fire safety education. That is part of the fire marshal's office. The 3 houses go to schools and they teach they fill up with artificial smoke. We don't want to hurt anybody. And it teaches young children how to evacuate a smoke-filled house. I will tell you that I believe these houses have saved countless lives around the state of Georgia. I'll even very briefly, if I may, mention in Houston County that we were at a preschool, a daycare center. We go there in the summertime when the regular schools are closed, and a young girl that was in pre-K went through the fire safety house, learned about fire safety. She lived with her grandparents and her parents and I think another set of adults. It was sort of a lot of people living at the grandparents' house. They were an economically challenged family. in a rural area of the county. She went home and insisted that her grandparents buy a smoke detector because they had never had one, and insisted that the grandparents do a fire drill because one had never been done, and this house had about half a dozen kids and about 4 to 6, about 5, I think maybe 5 adults. They did that. About a month and a half later, the fire alarm went off in the middle of the night. Everyone knew exactly what to do, evacuated the house instantly. As the last person was walking out the door and shutting the door behind them, the gas furnace exploded and pretty well leveled the house and probably would have killed almost anybody in there. So had they not had that smoke detector, and they wouldn't have had the smoke detector had they not gone through the fire safety house, you could have had a very large family might not have survived. And
I didn't know.
Brief commercial, sir.
That's good, good. So you have 3 of them now. One was donated, and you purchased 2 some time ago.
Yeah, the two purchased with state funds are very old. They're both 10 years plus old.
What's it cost to?
Purchase price on a new one is about $45,000, starting about $45,000, depending on the options. They also require a towing vehicle. The vehicle is you can't just use a regular Ford pickup truck. You have to have the dually pickup truck, diesel engine, because of the torque required. It's the towing vehicle is normally. Yeah, it requires an F-150 to pull it, and it's about another $30,000 on the state contract is what is required.
All righty. Any other questions from anybody? So your total staff is how many, Commissioner, now?
Why don't you come up here? Authorized 310. We currently have filled, because of funding difficulties, 249 are the filled ones. 61 vacancies. Those are vacancies that we would like to fill. They're just simply there's no funding for those vacancies.
Okay. Number 28.
Mr. Commissioner, that was a real grand interest you made there when you first started talking there. But I agree with you. A lot of things I think that are happening and should not be happening the way they're happening. Some years ago, I chaired this same subcommittee. We had differences about the type of cars or the expense, the amount of money you pay for your cars. Are you still riding those expensive cars, or have you come
Actually,
down?
I've never actually ridden an expensive car.
You called it your office, but
any car I've had is exactly. It's a lot. Put it this way, it's a lot cheaper than the car that the governor and lieutenant governor drive.
Is that
a lot cheaper.
Is that why you made the speech you made, because you were trying to ride and sit in that office?
I simply made a speech as a constitutional officer that's here to serve the people of Georgia, and I am displaying a servant's heart to serve the people, and I was called upon by my moral conscience to make those comments.
Mm-hmm. My next question, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind, the pickup truck that you're talking about to carry these units around in, around $30,000.
Yes, sir.
That truck can't be bought a lot. See, I farm for a living, and I buy pickup trucks, and I buy the kind with all the options on it, and we pay $35,000 for them. We get some a lot cheaper.
That's the state contract price. This truck has 4 rear tires, the dual rear tires, so it's a 6-tire pickup truck. It's a diesel engine. The weight of pulling the fire safety house, we tried pulling it with gasoline pickup trucks in the early, and we basically ripped up besides the fact they said you could see the gas meter needle just go down, basically it ripped the transmission system apart on that truck. A traditional pickup truck just cannot handle that weight. It requires the heavy, more expensive pickup truck. You are pulling a lot of weight, and to pull that weight every day just is beyond the capabilities of a less expensive pickup truck. We tried that, and it turned out to be an expensive lesson because we poured a ton of money into that truck to try to keep it moving. I think we bought like 2 or 3 transmissions for one pickup truck.
Thank you. I'll buy that.
I don't see any further questions. Thank you for being here. Appreciate
Thank
what
you.
you do.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I'm going to go to DOAS.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you working us in. My name is Brad Douglas. I'm Commissioner at DOAS. And for purposes of the tracking pages, we'll be referring to pages 10 through 13, I believe, Sarah? Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, I'd like to point out that as several of the agencies today have stated, the budget cuts have obviously hit very hard. Department of Administrative Services in particular, with the governor's recommendation, is looking at a 40+% decrease in its state funding. Significant decreases across most, if not all, the program areas. According to the tracking sheets, I won't spend too much time on the common changes. I think they're pretty self-explanatory. Obviously, DOAS is one of the participating agencies in the Gate 2010 outsourcing. When it comes to our administrative division, the reductions you see there, actions that we've taken already, key staff reductions, including the Chief Information Officer for the agency. With the outsourcing effort in Gate 2010, we didn't feel like that position was no longer needed, so we had a reduction in force there, along with 2 other positions. We also had several contracts that we ended and various other operating expenses that compose the reductions in the administrative division, which supports the 5 outward-facing divisions of DOAS. With fleet management, you see a significant reduction there for personal services. And for the most part, that is the staff the technical staff that supports the fleet management information system that helps us track a lot of the cost and elements of the state fleet, which is some 20,000 vehicles overall. And so we're having to be very, very creative in the continuing population of that system and getting agencies to comply with the information needed to track the cost of the state fleet. With regards to the mail and courier division, which is focused on providing services primarily here to Capitol Hill within a 35-mile radius of the city, the reductions taken there included 1 position, which was one of the mail clerks, and the delay in one of the delivery mail vehicles. Although I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we had a transmission to blow up yesterday on one of the vehicles, has about 80,000 miles on it. So we'll be trying to see if we can locate another perhaps underutilized vehicle to replace that one. Otherwise, it becomes a decision of do we put a $1,400 transmission in such an old vehicle. And various other operating cuts in mail and courier. With risk management, again, you see the numerous cuts. State funds are not involved here. These are other funds which primarily come from the billings for the various lines of insurance that risk management handles. Through a recent reorg under the new director of risk management, we had 6 positions that were eliminated, and overall this program ran at about $137 million pace in 08, and in 09, $129 million, which is about an $8 million reduction year over year in the overall cost of the unit. Those figures cover all of the claims handling, the value of those claims, which cover the various lines within risk management, including workers' comp, property damage, liability claims against the state. With regards to state purchasing, you see a very significant cut there of just over $4 million in state funds. Virtually, the governor's budget removes all, but a very, very small amount of state funds within state purchasing. There is law in the books that allows state purchasing to have reserves based off the contracts that it puts in place for statewide contracts across the state, and those reserves will be fully tapped out this year as a result of the $4+ million cut in state funds. We're also delaying 8 hires that were a part of the original build-out of the organizational structure as described in the procurement transformation that the Commission for a New Georgia study had recommended. So we're holding off on those 8 positions and the various other operating expense reductions in order to comply with the governor's budget request. With regards to surplus property, again, this is a self-funded unit. This is a unit that does not rely on state funds. This unit sells surplus assets of the state. First, if it can't redistribute those to other agencies within the state, then obviously it sells them out to the public. And in this case, fully self-funded in terms of it takes proceeds back from the assets that are sold. Yet, with the economic conditions that the state finds itself in, the asset stream where agencies are surplusing various assets has been drastically reduced over the last year. So since this is a self-funded unit, we had to take some drastic action. There previously had been 3 warehouses across the state where we had stored the surplus items and posted them for sale, and the public came to pick them up, or other agencies came to look at them there. Excuse me. The financial conditions that we were met with caused us to close those 3 warehouses earlier this year, back in the October time frame, and we reduced 2/3 of the overall surplus staff, taking 23 people out of the organization. So 23 out of 30 overall that have been reduced out of DOES. And there's yet another program area that, for whatever reason, I'm not quite sure, is not presented in the tracking sheet, and that is the post office division, which doesn't appear. Again, no state funds involved with the post office, although we have outsourced 2 of the post offices that had been on Capitol Hill. The remaining post office is here in this building. We're running about a $20,000 shortfall on a $90,000 budget, so we do have plans to close the post office in this building to meet the shortfall.
Questions? Yeah, Rick, tell me how many total vacancies do you have right now? Brad, excuse me.
I don't know that I've got the exact number. I know that we're holding 8. I don't know if I've got it with me. I know that we're holding 8 in state purchasing. And I know that there's no other money associated with any of the open positions that we had. There was no other appropriations associated with any of the open positions, but we can get that count.
Okay. I had another question. In the surplus property, how much have you collected this year in the surplus property section?
Gene, would you happen to know what that number is?
A little over $2 million.
A little over $2 million thus far, year to date.
That's year to date, $2 million?
Yes, sir. About 66% of that goes back to the various agencies. Is that correct, Gene? Okay. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay, there's a question on 27.
Oh, that was me.
Okay. Chairman Smith.
Oh. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to commend DOAS as far as their risk management area. We had our study committee over the summer, and we were very impressed with the results that have occurred within the last short period of time since you hired Chris to manage this risk management. And to give you an example, a lot of states, when they implemented a strong risk management program, had savings anywhere from 10, 20, 30, 50%. And these are the kind of numbers we're looking for to start. To give you an example also, one department, and I'm not going to say who it is, but one department said that it was too expensive for them to participate in this particular program, and the comments were, you cannot afford not to, because when you look at this department, they had 18% of the workforce, but yet they had 20-something% of the cost, and they had 60-something% of their claims went through 7 hospitals. So there's some things that have to be looked into and encouraged. So what we recommended and approved by Chairman Harbin was an oversight committee to ensure that all the various departments were active participants, because this is a big expenditure for the state.
Representative Smith, I thank you for the kind words, and you're absolutely right. The Comprehensive Loss Control Program is the program you're referring to, and I'd be remiss if I didn't think Chairman Rogers' Senate Bill 425 is the legislation that allowed us to create a lot of these incentives and disincentives. And so, like you, we're very pleased with the direction that we're headed. The reduction in the overall program cost for risk management that I mentioned earlier, reducing it last year from $137 million overall program to $129.
That's just the start.
Is the start, but a very good start, and it's going to get better from here. Absolutely. So thank you. We appreciate both your support on the program, and we look forward to continued success.
You through, Chairman Smith?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I was the one that asked you to vote for that bill too last year. So.
And I always do what my leader says.
Thank you. I do have another question, if I could, on the surplus property unit. $2 million, with 66% goes back. What is the total cost of operating surplus property?
There are two elements. There's the state surplus operation, and there's a separate federal surplus operation handling federal assets that the state is eligible for. And Gene, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's just over, it's about $1.6 million on the state side and about $415,000 on the federal side.
So it's not a break-even operation then, correct?
It had not been and wasn't headed that way, and it has to be, which is why I had to make the drastic cuts with the warehousing staff and closing the warehouses. And so right now I have a 2% positive operating margin, but it's teetering, and that's why this unit has to rely on some of its reserves from year to year, because it is a self-funded unit, and it's obviously relying on the asset stream that comes from various agencies and universities in terms of, and market as well,
sure,
in terms of what the assets bring in the marketplace. One of the things that we've tried to do, not to get too much in the weeds on it, but there were certain items that it was costing us as a state more to handle to try to post it for sale than we were getting for it. The example is the desk that might be surplused, and we were getting approximately $7 for it, but when we looked at the cost of handling it, it's costing us $26 or $27. we're trying to give those items away to charity because that's a cheaper alternative for the state than the $20 loss we were taking.
Number 24, Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, I had a couple of questions, if you don't mind. On page 10, and this, I know this is throughout the budget and may have been covered in some other presentation, but on this 12.0.1 where the shows $131,000 because of the this GATE program, my question is, aren't you all going to be billed though, or do you not? Are you no longer billed for telecommunications through GTA? I mean, I guess I'm wondering if it's outsourced, but it's going to be provided, and I thought that your agency would be billed, even though it's a vendor providing the services.
We will be billed, and we are participating. Gene, do you have any additional data on the 131?
What that 131 is, the initial project identified what the costs were going to be, but after the contract was let, when they went into the due diligence, it came out at a lower number, so that we still have in our budget what we will be paying, but this was in excess, since the contract is that there will be no more money. That's our share of urban works for the cost, and we contribute that to other elements of the state to pay for their gate that they made the contract.
Okay. So Representative Parsons, if I may, another way to look at that is when our actual costs were analyzed for the service, our actual costs were realized to be less than what was originally anticipated. So that money is being taken out of our budget and reallocated to cover other participants at the GATE program.
Okay, but if it was, but for this to be the savings, they would have to be $131,000 less than was in your base budget. Isn't that correct? I mean, it wouldn't be less. How much less it would have been projected to be? It would have to be how much less than was in the budget originally for it.
That is correct. What was initially in our budget.
Okay. Okay. And then the second one, if I may, and you may have gone over this. Same page 10, fleet management. 12.2.2 will not fill vacancy of database administrator as it is not currently needed. You may have mentioned that, but I don't recall.
No, I did not. We had determined ourselves that that one position in the IT support staff at the Fleet Management Information System we could do without. Additional cuts came on top of that when the governor's budget was assembled.
Okay.
And so that means that we'll end up taking pretty much the rest of the IT support staff out as well.
Okay, so whatever that person did, it's no longer needed then.
That function ended, and then the remaining, I think it's 6 positions roughly, are needed, but we're going to have to let them go anyway. Okay.
And then on page 12, I think it's pretty much on page 12 under surplus property. This is my last question, really, but throughout these items here, most of them have a reference due to economic circumstances, and then refers to the Americus and Swainsboro surplus centers are closing. And I may probably am mistaken on this, but I thought that y'all had planned to close centers anyway. I mean, is it just because of the economic circumstances, or weren't y'all going to do that anyway?
We had planned to do it 2 years hence, and the economic situation through the first 2 months of this year, we were showing $150,000 in the red for that unit. And so we had to speed up and do basically in a month what we were planning to do more systematically and orderly. And it resulted in the immediate dismissal of 23 staff.
Okay, so economic conditions or circumstances, but it just had to speed it up. It just seems like economic circumstances get blamed for everything anymore, and they're just looking at that. It seemed like it shouldn't be blamed for something it didn't need to be blamed for. Thank you.
Still working out the kinks, but what I will say was it was part of the overall strategic plan. We're the only state in the nation who has a completely virtual surplus operation. Everyone else is still running their warehouses. So regardless of the reason, it's the right way to go. We agree with you.
Chairman, may I ask one more question? And this will be my last. I know last year in the budget, I'm looking through here, and I may have missed some places in yours or in other parts of the budget. Last year, for the first time, and maybe the only time, there were items that showed, line items that showed savings due to implementation of the Commission on New Georgia initiatives. I don't think there are any in here, and I would think yours would be a department where if there were any savings from that, they would be in your department, since you have surplus property and some of the functions you have. Are there any? Do you know of any savings that were due to not economic circumstances, but implementation of the governor's what we call Commission for New Georgia?
Well, absolutely. One of the commission task forces was the Risk Management Task Force, and the Risk Management Task Force outlined many of the initiatives being carried today, and it included new legislation, which was passed. It included a new org structure, the creation of a loss control unit, the Comprehensive Loss Control Program that Representative Smith referenced earlier, not by name, but that was the program he was referencing, have all resulted in an $8 million reduction in the cost of the risk management unit year over year. Again, $137 million down to the $129 million. So while it's not specifically called out as that, it's directly attributable. So
okay, I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Chairman Williams.
Got me now? Okay. On surplus property, I know you can't give me an exact dollar amount now, but what is the average inventory amount that you know across the board of what you got in inventory as far as dollar amount for surplus property?
Zero. I no longer carry inventory. I have no inventory in the warehouse.
Okay. So it's all gone. This $2 million, where did it come from that you sold off?
The $2 million came from what had been warehoused, and the way that we operate today is if an agency or university has something that needs to be surplused, the first order of business is that we put it on a website for internal redistribution within the state so that other agencies can pick it up prior to it being sold to the public. If it does need to be sold to the public, we've increased the cycle time, the days that it's out on a website. We use eBay and govdeals.com are two of the primary sites. And once that item is bought, they go to where the item is at the agency location or university location to pick the item up.
So you're getting out of the surplus altogether?
No, sir. We're getting out of the warehousing business.
Warehousing.
We still, by statute, still are charged with surplusing the state's assets.
Okay. And you say now that these items that are sold go back to the agency that had it up for surplus?
Again, certain of the monies go back to the agencies who provided the items, yes.
Okay. Do you account for it in your agency, or is it each individual agency that does this to account for their money that they get?
Once it's sent back to the agencies, we account for what's been sent back, and once it goes back to the agencies, they account for it from there, sir.
Okay.
Representative Pruitt.
Is there one particular, thank you, Mr. Chairman, is there one particular agency that will get the biggest bulk of the 66%, or is it spread pretty equally, or is there one agency that will get most of the $2 million?
It's the larger agencies, Representative Pruitt, that would generate retired assets. What is true is that the vast majority of these assets are vehicles that are retired, and again, that's one of the reasons why we've had to take some drastic actions with the cost. The agencies are having to hold on to the vehicles longer, and just like with our own vehicle for the mail service, if we can't find another vehicle someplace to replace it, we'll have to put a $1,500 transmission into 180,000 mile vehicle versus surplusing that and getting another because we don't have the funds. So those larger agencies, say the big seven, would generate most of it, but certainly we'd be happy to provide the committee or you a breakdown of who gets what. We have that information. I don't have that with me here today, but we have it on a regular basis.
I wouldn't mind seeing that if you don't mind. One of the reasons I certainly want to see how it's accounted for, particularly if it's vehicles. Thank you.
One other question. Tell me, in administration, Brad, how many employees you have there? 12.1 through 12.115. Do you have it broken out by administration, fleet management, mail? And
Yes, just bear with me a second. I believe that is, Gene, check me here, I believe that is 48 total, and that's composed of the Commissioner's Office, the legal team, accounting, IT, and human resources. 45. I stand corrected, 45.
Okay, fleet management, how many you got in there?
I have 11. 11.
Okay. Of course, all your slots are not filled, I'm sure, correct?
No, they're not.
Okay. And the mail, and I heard you say you were going to close the post office over here in the Coverdale Legislative Office Building?
Yes, that will impact 2 positions.
Well, how are they going to get their mail over here?
We have 2 adjacent post offices.
Okay.
And so we'll obviously have a heavy communications campaign. It's terrible timing, we understand that. But we're running $20,000 in the deficit in a unit that has to have a balanced budget.
Okay. So, okay, risk management, how many personnel do you have there?
I have a count of 28.
And how many vacancies do you have there?
I don't show any. I don't think I have any.
Okay. And state purchasing?
62, I believe is. Yes, 62.
Okay, and surplus property?
12 down from 35.
Okay. And surplus funds, do you have any surplus funds, or was that question just asked just so? In state purchasing, do you have any reserves or?
The reserves will be completely utilized this year due to the complete pullback of all state funds from the state purchasing division.
So it went into lapse funds, is that what you're saying?
No, sir. There were some reserve funds there that state purchasing had, and an allocation of state appropriated funds was made to us at the beginning of 2009. Now those have been deallocated, and we've been told we'll get no further funding.
Okay, so you don't have any surplus at all then on any division, correct?
I don't have any surplus funds in state purchasing. If you get to risk management, there are trust funds set up to fund the various lines of insurance business.
Okay. Okay, I think that's all the questions we have. Uh-oh. Representative.
Yes, in the surplus property, by you cutting back your manpower there, and you're talking about cutting out some of the, I guess, your time that you have. What happened with the surplus property in the state now?
The surplus property, again, is there's a shorter cycle time to sell it. We're asking the agencies and universities to hold it for no more than 15 days. And so we've sped up the time to put it out to market. And when buyers come, and they literally come from around the country, we've had 30 buyers come from 37 states and 7 countries to buy the surplus assets of the state. They come to the specific agency or university where the good was last used, and it's picked up from there. So we coordinate with the surplus property coordinators in those already in those agencies or the facilities operators to make that sale. They're no longer warehoused in any central location.
How will this affect our local communities, our towns, and our cities?
No effect. In fact, the local towns and municipalities still have the ability to have first pass, if you will, before the goods go out and are sold to the public.
Thank you.
Chairman Parsons.
Thank you, Chairman. I just happened to think when the chairman was asking about surplus funds, last year we discussed the P cards and that fee that you received, that your department was receiving back. What's the status of that? I mean, am I not mistaken that there's a fee, a rather large fee that you all get back from the bank, I believe, for the process or the processing for them handling the P cards?
Yes, that's part of the reserve funds that go to the state purchasing division, and those are the state reserve funds that are being used this year as a result of all the state funds being pulled back in, and those reserves will be tapped out.
Okay. Well, how much? What is the size of that fund, or how much money came back and is coming back? Has come back, I guess, in this fiscal year so far.
It's a one-time payment. The next payment is due August of this year. The overall purchasing volume is down about $400 million over what it was the previous year. So I don't have with me a current calculation as to what that is.
What was it last August?
Unless someone here with me happens to know the specific figure, I'd have to get back with you on it. I don't have that with me.
Thank you.
Do you have the figure?
Right, it was $5.2 million that we received, $1.3 million went back up to the county, so we netted about 3.9.
$3.9 million overall was the net.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the questions. Good job.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members.
We'll be back in touch with you.
Thank you.
Merit system. Okay. I'm glad it's you all. Y'all are putting me to sleep.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. And
can you tell us who you are?
Steve Stevenson, Commissioner of State Personnel Administration, formerly Georgia Merit System.
Okay.
If you refer to page 30 of the tracking document, we actually take up about a half a page of that document. I'll take any questions, but I think the gist of it is because we don't receive state funds and we're really based on fee assessments, the 10% reduction that we'll take in the budget this year, we actually turn around and write a check back to the Treasury for almost $1.4 million. In order for us to do that, what we've done, we've actually reduced headcount by right at 25%. We were at about 150 employees in State Personnel Administration. Currently, we're at 111. And we anticipate, as a result of what we know, that will be coming down for 2010 year also from an assessment standpoint, that we'll wind up reducing about 10% further, which will put us at about right at 100 employees.
Good. Any questions? No? Good job.
Thank you, sir.
Sorry you had to wait.
That's okay.
Okay. Banking and finance. Thank you. You go ahead if you want to.
Okay. I was just waiting until they were passed out. Good afternoon. I'm Rob Braswell, Commissioner with Georgia Department of Banking and Finance. As you see from the handout, I'll move quickly, and feel free to ask any questions at any time. You'll see originally we had 5 programs we operated under. We have gotten approval to change those to 4 programs. That's something that we changed internally when I became commissioner back in December of 2005, January of 2006, to streamline operations. That last if you look down at the bottom there on number 4, the last one, consumer protection and assistance, we'll touch on that a little bit more later, but that's kind of a shell of its former self, because that's where we have taken some of our cuts, focusing on our core programs. If you turn over on the next page, you'll see the 6, 8, and 10% reduction items that we would have to install or implement to meet those percentages. What we have accomplished are those first 3 bullet points at the top of the page, a reduction of force of 3 of the 5 employees that were in the consumer assistance program that I just spoke of. We eliminated a district IT specialist position, as well as 2 district administrative assistant positions have gone unfilled. The second one actually will go unfilled as of next month. And that is the extent of the percentage that we have taken so far as a cut. It has been 3.5%. I had a conversation, 2 conversations, 2 meetings with the governor regarding what type cuts we could take. We have, throughout the years, been reducing the number of staff we have on board, as well as our responsibilities have continued to increase on a yearly basis. And then we were kind of hit with a tsunami of what's happening in the financial markets now, and the financial crisis that we're going through as far as the banking. And so the governor graciously agreed that he would recommend just the 3.5% cut for our agency, because he did not want to impact the examiner positions, the feet on the ground that are in the banks and in the mortgage lenders and mortgage broker entities. If you turn over to the next page, you'll see a graph there that shows the size of the number of institutions we regulate, as well as the assets under our supervision. So you'll see back in 12/31/01, we had about $154 billion of assets under our supervision. 346 institutions. Go 6.5, 7 years into the future, you'll see that we've grown $122 billion as far as the number of assets under our supervision. If you just took the amount of growth during that 6.5-year span and compared it to all our peers across the nation, that would put us about the 10th or so largest banking department within the nation, and that's just the amount of growth or change from 01 to now. As far as the total number of assets under our supervision, we're 3rd, I believe, in the nation. To give you also some perspective as far as the additional responsibilities that have come upon us over the last 6-7 years, the number of bank examiners we had during the last economic downturn, severe economic downturn, was in 1991. We had 90 bank examiners at that time. We currently have 60. As far as the total number of employees we had back then, it was 134. We currently have 111 employees. On the next page, it shows kind of a graph depicting how the breakdown as far as the type of entities we regulate, as well as the number of entities. You can see the growth pattern there from left to right. Number of banks grew significantly, 35 over that span. We have since, due to consolidation, due to, unfortunately, we had 5 bank failures in the last quarter of last year. That number has shrunk. It is now 277 banks that we have. Additionally, regarding another area that has been a high priority for us, of course, have been the mortgage broker and mortgage lender area. You'll see kind of a steady growth there, and then it tapers off, and then it has decreased. Obviously, with the change in the mortgage industry, many people have gotten out of the industry over the last year, and our licensees have started to shrink some in that area. Unfortunately, the amount of fraud is still very prevalent in that area. We do a risk-based focus examination, and the number of administrative actions that we have issued to people in the mortgage business continues to increase. Fortunately, that program has been very successful. That for years, Georgia was #1 in mortgage fraud. And through these efforts, as well as collaborating with other law enforcement agencies, that number has dropped from 1 to 4, then it dropped to 6, and we're anticipating hopefully being out of the top 10 this year. Those numbers will come out in April. Then the next page just shows a depiction as far as the revenue the department brings in versus the appropriation. You can see how, and the last page will show kind of a trend of that. But last year we brought in approximately about $9.2 million more than we were appropriated. Years past, that number's been somewhere in the 10 to 12 million range. Then, like I say, the last page is just a graphic depiction of the disparity or the difference between the revenue and appropriations. And I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Pat, how many more banks do you have that are upside down right now, that state charter banks that you're having to deal with right now?
A significant number. We have, and I have to kind of be careful in a public forum to tout numbers, but we have a significant number that are on the problem status. We'll have quite a few that will fail this year as well. Back in 1991, last time we had a problem situation of any magnitude, really, we had 133 banks on our problem list at that time. We anticipate the number growing to about there or so as well. The difference is that the severity of the problems are greater this go around than they were in 1991.
Okay. So these are all state charter banks that you deal with only, right?
That's correct.
And credit unions.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. Just to give you some perspective on your question, prior to August 29th, only 17 state chartered banks had failed between 1933, the inception of the FDIC, and August 28th of 2008. Then between August 29th and the end of the year, we closed 5.
Challenging time.
Exactly.
Any questions from anybody? I don't see any. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Thank you very much. Thank you, committee members.
Okay, audits.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee. Our budget cuts with regard to 2009, we discussed with the Legislative Fiscal Office. We were requested to take a 6% cut. That cut was comprised of basically 3 components. Rate decreases brought about by changes in the state employer rates that were charged, foregoing the raises that had been built in our budget, and the final item that we used to make up that particular cut was $500,000, which we were appropriated last year to develop an audit function around the reviewing the QBE funding formula. We were to develop that function, go out, look in the schools, and make sure that their information that was reported to justify their QBE funding was accurately reported and such as that. Given the crunch, it was determined, and we worked with the House Budget Office and such, that initiative needed to be postponed or either eliminated. So that $500,000 was taken out. We also carried that 6% reduction on into the 2010 year, and that's when we have identified approximately 8 positions that we would be able to cut to make up that particular difference. Those would be permanent reductions in staff. I'll be glad to answer any questions that you may have.
Russ, I know y'all are awfully busy, but I wanted to ask a question that involved the school system that I represent.
Yes, sir.
And did not know this. Why does it take 12 months? Why do y'all audit 12 months later on a fiscal school year? Why is it?
Primarily, it's a manpower and priority issue. Our first priority when we're doing our financial audits and it utilizes some 150 to 200 of our staff is to get the state's financial statements audited. That includes, and our education audit division audits all the colleges and units of the university system, the units of the technical colleges, and that's the priority of their work. And then in mid-November, then they roll off and begin doing the local school systems. It does put us in a bad position because we want to get those reports out sooner, and we have been over time. We've been able to pull the last date of those reports up near the end of the fiscal year, and we would continue to try and improve that delivery. But it's a matter of priorities and staffing, and our first responsibility is seen as auditing the financial statements of the state as a whole.
Well, I was just curious. I didn't know that and didn't realize the school system did not require an outside audit themselves because it costs them a few more dollars, and then 12 months later I get a surprise.
Yes, sir.
The school board got a surprise, so I was just.
Yes, sir. There have been situations where we have worked with the school systems and maintained an oversight role. We had several systems who were concerned about the timing of the audit and their ability to sell GO bonds, because they would have to have an audited set of financial statements. In those instances, we have worked some arrangements with them whereby we're involved with an outside auditor, which they pay for, rather than the state doing it, and we will oversee their work because by statute we're responsible for the audit of all the school systems, and there have been some limited instances where that has occurred.
Yeah. 180 school systems, correct?
227 audits.
227 audits.
When you take into account the REISs, the city school systems, and such as that.
Okay. Got a question, Chairman Williams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Russell, I want to follow up on what the Chairman said. I've got some surprises too with my school systems up there. When you find these deficiencies, what's the follow-up as far as making sure they correct what the deficient? I mean, how do you keep up with that, and should we be notified that either they do or don't do it?
Yes, sir. If the way the process works is that when we complete the audit, the school system is required to submit a corrective action plan. We include that within the body of the audit report. And what that corrective action plan denotes is how they intend to address the audit findings that we have identified. Then they will, then as a part of our audit of the next year, one of the first things we do is we verify, did in fact that school system correct this problem, or is it an existing problem? If it continues to exist, we will cite it in the audit report once again. So it's probably a year follow-up after we've issued the report.
Uncorrected at that time, is any action taken to force these systems or whatever the deficient, not only the school system, anybody that follow up, that we some sort of action?
Yes, sir. We don't have any sort of prosecutorial powers or anything like that. The State Department of Education has responsibility for monitoring the activities of the systems, and they might have the statutory or regulatory clout to force an action.
Get them back in conformance. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Russell. Appreciate all you all do. I know y'all work hard.
Appreciate it.
Workers' compensation. You guys wanted to go last anyway, isn't that correct?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Carolyn Hall with the Workers' Compensation Board. And I want to thank you and the others for letting us move from yesterday to today, because we did have two staff whose fathers died in the last few days and funerals. So I really appreciate your understanding and making this long day a little longer. Just want to start out, as I usually do for these kind of discussions, about our funding for workers' compensation, and we're on page 43 of the tracking sheet, is that we are funded strictly on assessments of the insurance carriers who write workers' compensation in Georgia and the self-insured employers. A number of states fund their workers' compensation boards and commissions this way. Under our assessment process, we assess based on premium, and we're currently the lowest, for those agencies set up the way we are, the lowest in the countries. And I've attached the statute. Like other agencies, we also bring in additional funds through fines and penalties. Those are not accounted for in our budget. They just go into Treasury, and last fiscal year it was about $988,000. But the structure of the board is that you set the budget, and then we assess the company's pro rata and bring in that amount to fund the board. It's paid into Treasury, and we draw it down. When the board's budget is cut, then we, during our next assessment, give that as a rebate. We assess less on those carriers who fund the board. So there's no gain to Treasury by the cut. So what has been happening since about 1992 is the addition to the board's budget of the line item payment to Treasury. That allows the board to put that money additionally into Treasury, which is the kind of like what our savings would have been if we were budgeted otherwise. I don't know if I've explained that very well. So you'll see on the tracking sheet the only changes that we have are the common changes of the salary increase, the using of the reserves in the state health benefit plan for this year. And we have, as a smaller agency, we have not been one of the original participants in the GATE to 2010 project, but they have projected this $143,000 as what will be our contribution to that for the year. I was sorry I didn't get to hear Patrick Moore yesterday. That was one of the reasons I would have liked to have been here yesterday. But you'll see then down in we had the proposed differences for 6%, 8%, and 10% for the assessment for payment to state treasury. And so that is the change in our budget. So it looks like an addition to the budget, which it is, but allows that money to be used by y'all, really, because it's money paid into Treasury. We do get services from other state agencies that we're not charged for directly by line item, and so that's just money, to be reallocated where the need is. So that's kind of how that works. It's a little different. In the meantime, we have 166 positions statewide. As you know, we have offices in Dalton and Macon and Columbus, Savannah, Gainesville. And we currently have 166 positions, but we have a number of vacancies, several of which we've carried for several years. And then this fiscal year, we are, through attrition, trying to hold, we're not filling vacancies as they occur. And part of this is helping us. We've been involved in, for us, a large technology project of about $4 million, going from a paper to an electronic system, electronic claim files, web access for the carriers, for the claims offices, for the parties to the claim and the attorneys. We've been able to really increase our efficiency. We're reducing our courier costs between Atlanta and the field offices because now it's all online access. So we're holding vacancies, looking at our business needs, which we see will change over the next 2 or 3 years once we have complete integration of our technology. I call it Integrated Claims Management System, which is electronic filing and electronic workflow statewide.
Got a question here from, I think it's Chair Lady Smith.
Thank you. And first of all, on behalf of this Appropriations Committee, express our sympathy to your members. That's always difficult thing
Right. Thank
had
you.
happened. And your first page of your handout, where you show the assessment rates by state for year 2008, I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
First of all, how are your assessment rates determined?
The assessment rate is determined by partly a percentage of the premium for every. In other words, if our budget is, I'll take something, a round number. If our budget were $10 million, then we take that $10 million. Tom Risco, who's been at the board for more than 35 years. There are 363, I think, insurance carriers. Most of those, of course, are domiciled outside of Georgia. Most carriers don't domicile here. And then the rest of the amount is made up by individual self-insureds and self-insured group funds. So they report their premium, the insurance carriers, per year. The self-insurers report number of employees, and we calculate an insurance premium equivalent. And then Tom, you can do all the math, but then he figures what percentage on those premiums would bring in $10 million, or $17 million is in our case. And that's how the others do it too. And compared to other states, we operate with a much smaller budget. We're also fortunate, and I did put a slide in there too on the cost per worker for workers' compensation, which is important for economic development. It's also important for costs for employers, because even now we have a very good market in Georgia. There are, like I said, 363 in just insurance carriers writing workers' compensation. So you get competition in the market. And, of course, the more carriers you have, the lower the assessment per carrier is. You know, in some states where the workers' compensation market gets bad, if you only had 100 carriers doing business in your state and you had the $17 million budget to assess for, then per carrier, the assessment would have to be higher than that we have now, which is under 1%. In checking with the insurance commissioner's office, when they do their filings there, most of the carriers are allowed to build in about I think a minimum of 1%. That's kind of their write-off for the workers' compensation assessment. So they're actually making a little profit on that in Georgia, because our assessment is right now below 1%. And even with this addition of the payment to Treasury, the assessment would remain under 1% on the carriers and self-insureds. Maybe I've said too much.
No, and I'll tell you the reason I'm asking this question is that in these difficult budget times, your legislators are going to look at this first bar graph with Georgia at 0.93%, Mississippi at 1.60%, Arizona at 3%. So they're going to go, whoa, why isn't Georgia where it needs to be? And so your explanation is good. It's good for our businesses. It's a business-friendly measure.
That's a good thing for Georgia.
Yes.
And, yeah.
So, I mean, because it's going to be looked at.
Right. And it also means that, like some of the other states may have a workers' comp board with 500 employees, so they have a much larger budget, so their assessment has to be larger.
And then the other follow-up question.
All those things kind of play into what the assessment is.
Well, and there's still going to be a lot of questions in here as to see if...
I won't hand it out anymore.
I know. No, actually, it's good for us to look at.
Well, I wanted you to see it because it's a little hard for understand. That's why I attached the statute to show that it's not like we bring in money and then, like we do by the fines, that's not tied to our budget, like a lot of other agencies that have spoken here. But the way our statute reads is we assess in a sum certain for our budgeted amount, and that amount should be used for the operation of the board, and then if the budget's cut, then that money doesn't come into Georgia from those 300-something non-domiciled insurance companies.
So the point is that Georgia's a business-friendly state.
Right.
That's the first point. The second point, I think, is there's not a pot of money somewhere that y'all got. And then,
no.
Then the third point would be that you can't assess higher and return money to the Treasury because you offset it by being a deterrent to business. Okay. Believe me, this is going to be looked at, but I'm glad you gave it to us. Thank you.
Okay.
Anybody else? I have one, Judge, that I need to ask.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
The Department of Administrative Services.
Right.
I know we've got 34 judges there that say they could do more work. Why doesn't your agency utilize them? And of course, I'm no attorney like you guys out there, but why can't you utilize them? Why wouldn't you utilize them as far as savings? And I assume there would be.
Right. The Workers' Comp Board, and I think you mean like the OSA judges, right? The OSA, the Workers' Comp Board is set up where we adjudicate the disputes between. We were the original tort reform. Can't sue your employer or co-employee in tort. Workers' Comp came along in the 1920s. And in most jurisdictions, there's a workers' compensation court, or the cases go to state or superior court. Because we were adjudicating claims between third party, an injured worker and the employer insurance carrier. OSA was developed several years ago as a result of agencies having their own hearing officers, hearing claims between the public and their agency. And there was a kind of a built-in conflict of interest. And so OSA was created bringing those hearing officers who heard the cases between the public and the state. And I would say that, I don't believe that, putting them all together has ever been considered. We've had, judges probably with, we have 10 to 20 years of experience adjudicating workers' compensation claims. And they came about from very different systems.
Okay. So you're saying you'd rather do it yourself, and you've got plenty of manpower to take care of it, and you don't need other judges, the other. Right.
We're busy.
Are you behind?
But we're not behind, and we have. And like I said, with the technology, the efficiencies have really improved. But yeah, and I see with our efficiencies through attrition, in the future we may need less. So no, we don't need. I want them working. I want them working hard, which they are. But they're caught up and they're keeping within our time frames.
Are y'all seeing a decline in work comp injuries at this point, or are you seeing an increase?
Not right now, and we've been expecting an increase because usually when you start having plant closings and layoffs, historically you do get an increase in claims. We've done a lot of revisions in the law to cut costs by encouraging return to work on light duty programs. And when those are in place and then the plant closes or there's a layoff, then those people on light duty often then do refile their workers' compensation claim asking for benefits. But so far, we've monitored every month. We have not seen an increase yet.
Have you seen premiums?
It may be that it's it takes a while before we'll see it.
Have you seen premiums going down to this point, or do y'all monitor that?
No, well, the insurance commissioner monitors the premiums, the rate filings. In Georgia, I think that Georgia still has, from the last NCCI data, there is some discounting that's still going on in Georgia that's not going on, discounting below wherever the insurance commissioner sets the rates.
So it goes from January 1 to December 31st. Is that how the commissioner? I
think that's his filing period. There was a rate filing last year for an increase in workers' compensation rates on the loss cost side. We met with NCCI, who does the rate filings, to try to figure out what that was about because the indemnity or income disability payments had not really gone up. and it was based on the medical payments for workers' compensation in the years 2002 and 2003, and then with the longer tail, they decided they better put in did the rate filing for an increase. The insurance commissioner did not grant that increase. Back when we got Stan Carter to come over after he retired from General Motors and be our executive director, and we gave him the job of working on our medical fee schedule for workers' compensation, and we looked at it and found that we were sometimes 200% higher than Medicare and a good bit higher than some of the group group rates. So we did a big study, got some data. We wanted to keep it fair. We want to keep good providers in the system, but we have managed the medical rates both for physicians and hospitals, and the physicians and the hospitals and the payers are all on our committees, and they've worked it out. And I think the data shows for 2005 that those medical rates have come down and stabilized some. So I think that's one of the reasons the insurance commissioner didn't raise the rate. But
okay, one other question. I got an email the other day from a young person saying that we need to implement a law like some other states that if a employee is injured on the job and files a work comp claim, that we're one of the few states that disallows this, but if someone files a work comp claim and is injured, can be fired because of it. Has that been an issue? I've never heard of that being an issue.
I think it came up in a big way in, I think it was 1992. Georgia almost passed a law, prohibiting a firing for filing a workers' compensation claim, but did not, because we're still at the at-will employment. So it's, for that reason or any other. But from a business standpoint, and we do a lot of education with employer groups around the state. It's better not to fire the person and to try to bring them back to work, because if you fire them because of your injury, automatically they're entitled to temporary total disability benefits up to 400 weeks, as long as they're disabled. So there's a good financial incentive not to do it, but there's no penalty. It
hadn't been an issue here, though, that I'm familiar with.
Not since '92. Yeah.
Okay.
I hate to say I've been around that long. But.
Okay. And what are we paying weekly benefits now? $475?
It's 2/3 of your average weekly wage, and the maximum now is $500. Has been for a couple of years.
Okay.
We're not recommending an increase to that this year or anytime soon.
I agree.
The majority of our lost time claims that go over 7 days are paid at less than the maximum. In other words, a lot of times the higher wage earners, sometimes they're not in the jobs that so much cause the injuries, or if they have a severe injury, the employer may have another disability plan in place as well. And when the employer does have a disability plan, that pays, and they get credit. If it's more than the comp, they don't have to pay the comp. So,
okay. Representative Pruitt had a.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One quick question:
Yes,
are there
sir.
any fines and penalties levied other than because of lack of OSHA requirements? Is anything else?
Right. Well, no, we don't fine at all for OSHA.
Okay.
We fine for noncompliance with workers' compensation. In other words, every business with 3 or more employees who is not a farming operation must have workers' compensation insurance. And of course, if someone is operating in violation of the law, that makes them kind of an unfair competitor in the playing field. They're maybe able to give a lower price for a job because they're not carrying the required workers' comp. Then if we have a serious injury, there's no workers' compensation in place. A lot of times that medical treatment ends up getting paid by the state through Medicaid.
So that is the only penalty or fine that can be levied, is because they do not carry it?
That's the main one. We also can issue civil penalties against any party, a claimant, an attorney, an insurance carrier. And if we issue a civil penalty, that money does not come to us, but also goes into Treasury. The other money that goes to Treasury from workers' comp is if it's a death case and there are no dependents, then the carrier pays $10,000 into Treasury.
Thank you.
And all of those monies combined last fiscal year came up to $988,000.
Thank you.
Okay, I think that completes it, unless Judge Massey, you want to say anything? It's unusual when you don't want to say something.
Yeah, he does like to talk.
He used to, but would you like to say anything?
He told me to keep my mouth shut.
Okay. I was thinking that, but I wanted to hear you say that. So, okay. Thank y'all for being here.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for the accommodation.
You're welcome.